Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about something interesting. We will talk about learning English in your sleep. Many people dream of speaking English fluently. They study grammar, they memorize vocabulary, they watch videos and read books. But sometimes, after all that work, they still feel stuck. They feel tired, they feel frustrated, they start to wonder, is there an easier way? Maybe you feel this way too, right now, listening to this. A few years ago, I met a young man named Jack. Jack wanted to speak English well. His dream was simple, but it meant everything to him. He wanted to talk to people from different countries without feeling nervous. He wanted to watch English movies without reading the subtitles at the bottom of the screen. He wanted to listen to English songs and actually understand the words, not just enjoy the music. Most of all, he wanted to feel confident, calm, and normal the moment he opened his mouth to speak. So every single day, Jack studied. He learned new words. He wrote them down. He practiced sentences. He listened to conversations online. He did everything the books and the teachers told him to do. But after many months of this, he felt disappointed. He looked at all his effort, and he felt like he was moving in a circle, not forward. He thought, maybe I am just not improving fast enough. Maybe I am not smart enough for this. One evening, after a long, tiring day, Jack sat alone in his room. He looked at his notebook lying open on the table. It was completely full of English words, pages and pages of them. Some words felt easy now, words like happy, or tired, or house. But other words still felt strange and heavy, words he had written down 5, 6, maybe 10 times, and still could not remember the next morning. He felt his eyes getting heavy too. His mind felt full, almost crowded, the way a room feels when there are too many boxes inside it and no space left to walk. As he slowly closed his notebook, a strange thought suddenly appeared in his mind. It came from nowhere, the way small ideas sometimes do late at night. He asked himself, what if I could learn English while I sleep? At first, the idea felt silly, almost embarrassing to even think about. How could someone possibly learn a language while their eyes were closed and their body was resting? It sounded impossible, like a lazy person's dream, not a real method. But Jack could not stop thinking about it. Something about the question felt important, even if he did not understand why yet. The next day, his curiosity was still there, gently pulling at him. So he decided to search for answers. He read articles. He watched short videos. He listened to language experts and sleep scientists explain how the brain actually works. And slowly, he discovered something that genuinely surprised him. Your brain does not completely shut down when you sleep. Your body rests, yes, your muscles relax, and your eyes close. But inside your head, your brain keeps working in the background. It sorts through everything that happened during the day. It decides what to keep and what to let go. It takes the new things you learned and it slowly moves them into deeper, more permanent memory. Think of it like a busy library during the day. All day long, people bring in new books and drop them anywhere, on tables, on chairs, and in the wrong sections completely. By the evening, the library looks messy and confused. But at night, after everyone goes home and the doors are locked, a quiet librarian walks through every room. She picks up each book. She reads the title carefully. She places it exactly where it belongs, on the correct shelf, in the correct order, so that tomorrow, anyone can find it quickly and easily. Your brain does something very similar while you sleep. All the new English words and sentences you learn during the day are like those scattered books. While you rest, your brain slowly organizes them, strengthens them, and puts them in their proper place, so they are actually there for you tomorrow, ready to use. This idea changed something in Jack's mind. He realized that sleep was not empty, wasted time at all. Sleep was actually one of the most important parts of learning, not separate from it. Without enough good sleep, people forget new information much faster, no matter how hard they studied. But with good sleep, that same information becomes stronger, clearer, and easier to remember the next day. Jack understood something important in that moment. Learning English in your sleep does not mean opening a textbook while you are unconscious. That was never realistic. It means something much simpler. It means helping your brain hold on to English while it rests, instead of losing that new information every single night, the way water slips through fingers held too loosely. That very night, Jack decided to try something small and new. Before going to bed, instead of scrolling on his phone one last time, he chose a simple English story to listen to, only a few minutes long. The sentences were short, the words were easy, nothing complicated, nothing that made him stop and think too hard. He simply listened once, calmly, lying in the dark. Then he listened to the exact same story a second time. After that, he closed his eyes and let himself fall asleep naturally, without forcing anything else. The next morning, something small but interesting happened. When Jack played that same story again, many of the sentences suddenly sounded familiar to him, almost like he was hearing an old friend's voice instead of a stranger's. He recognized words more quickly than before. He understood more of the story without even trying hard. It was not magic. It was not some secret trick hidden from regular learners. His brain had simply continued its work while he slept, organizing what he had given it just before closing his eyes. That one small, simple experience was enough to motivate Jack completely. From that night on, he built a tiny daily routine for himself. Every evening, before sleeping, he spent about 20 minutes listening to English. Some nights it was a short story. Some nights it was a slow, calm conversation. Some nights it was a simple podcast made for beginners like him. He made one important rule for himself early on. He never chose material that was too difficult. He chose things he could already mostly understand, without a dictionary, without pausing every 5 seconds in frustration. This one small decision mattered more than he first realized, because many learners make exactly the opposite mistake. They choose English that is far too hard for their level, and then they end up feeling confused, tired, and discouraged, instead of calm and confident. Jack kept things simple, night after night. He relaxed his shoulders. He listened carefully but gently, never forcing himself to catch every single word. He did not worry if he missed a sentence here or there. He simply listened, and then he slept. And slowly, over several weeks, small changes began to appear. His listening became sharper. His vocabulary slowly grew larger, almost without him noticing the exact moment it happened. Words that once felt strange and foreign in his mouth started feeling familiar and natural, the way an old song feels familiar after you have heard it enough times on the radio. Then, one ordinary day, while Jack was simply watching an English video for fun, something remarkable happened. He suddenly understood a full sentence, instantly, without silently translating it into his own language first. For one brief second, English did not feel like a foreign puzzle anymore. It felt natural, almost effortless, like his own thoughts arriving directly in a new shape. He smiled to himself in that moment. The progress was still small. It was not perfect fluency yet, not even close. But it was real, and real progress, even small progress, feels completely different from empty hope. This is the real insight hidden inside Jack's story, and I want you to hear it clearly, because it matters more than any single trick or shortcut. Fluency does not usually arrive as one giant, dramatic breakthrough, the way it looks in movies. Fluency arrives through small improvements repeated consistently. One new word today, one clearer sentence tomorrow, and one small moment of understanding the day after that. Over time, these tiny pieces slowly connect together, and they become something genuinely powerful, a skill that once felt impossible, now living comfortably inside your own mind. But Jack was still only at the very beginning of this discovery. He would soon learn that sleep alone, by itself, could never make him truly fluent. Sleep could not replace real practice. It could not replace real listening or real speaking during the daytime hours. Sleep was never meant to be a shortcut. Think of it instead like a helper standing quietly behind the scenes. During the day, Jack did the real work, the listening, the practicing, the small mistakes, and the small victories. At night, sleep simply protected that work. It made sure the things he learned actually stayed with him, instead of slipping away by morning. And in the next part of his story, Jack was about to discover exactly how powerful that nighttime helper could truly become. A few weeks after Jack started his small evening routine, he woke up one morning feeling different. He could not explain it at first. Not clearly, not in exact words. Nothing dramatic had happened overnight. He had not suddenly become fluent. He had not learned 100 new words in his sleep. And yet something inside him had shifted, gently, without warning. When he listened to an English story that morning, the sounds felt more familiar than before. Words that once felt sharp and difficult now felt smooth, almost soft in his ears. Sentences seemed to flow more naturally through his mind, instead of arriving in broken little pieces that he had to force together. Jack was curious. Why was this happening? So one evening, he sat down and tried to understand it more deeply. He read a little about how the brain actually learns, and slowly he discovered something simple but powerful. The brain loves repetition. When we hear the same sound, the same word, or the same sentence many times, the brain slowly begins to recognize a pattern inside it. And once the brain recognizes a pattern, understanding that same pattern again becomes much easier the next time, and the time after that, and the time after that. This gave Jack an idea, a small experiment. Instead of listening to a brand new story every single night, what if he listened to the exact same story several nights in a row? At first, this idea felt strange, even a little boring. Most people would think, why listen to the same thing twice when there are thousands of new stories waiting online? But Jack decided to try it anyway, just to see what would happen. The first night, he listened to a simple story about a boy who traveled to a new city. He understood some parts clearly, other parts felt confusing, like a mountain hidden behind thick fog, there but impossible to see clearly. The second night he listened to that exact same story again, and this time, a little more of the fog lifted. He understood a bit more than before. The third night, even more words became clear, almost on their own, without him trying hard to force them. By the fifth night, something remarkable happened. Jack could understand almost the entire story, without much effort at all. almost as if the fog had finally cleared away completely, leaving the whole mountain standing there in plain sight. But the story had not changed. Not one single word inside it was different. The mountain had been standing there all along, exactly the same, from the very first night. What had truly changed was the fog, and the fog was never in the story. The fog was only ever inside Jack's own ear, slowly clearing away with each night of practice, until what had always been there could finally be seen clearly. This experience taught Jack something important, something many learners never fully understand. Sometimes we move too quickly through our learning. We jump from one video to another. We switch from one lesson straight to the next, never staying anywhere long enough. We keep searching endlessly for new content, believing that more content automatically means more progress. But real learning often lives inside repetition, not inside variety. Hearing the same words again and again is exactly what allows them to become a true, permanent part of your memory, instead of just a brief visitor that leaves again the moment you turn away. Because of this discovery, Jack created a small, gentle bedtime listening routine for himself. Every night, about 1 hour before sleeping, he turned off his distractions completely. He put his phone away in another room. He closed every app, every notification, every small noisy pull on his attention. Then he sat comfortably or lay in bed and simply listened to English. There was no pressure at this time, no test waiting for him afterward, no grade attached to how much he understood. Just calm listening, nothing more. This small change made learning feel completely different for Jack. Very soon, bedtime became his favorite part of the entire day. He actually looked forward to it, the way some people look forward to a warm cup of tea after a long day. Instead of feeling stressed about studying English, as he once did with his notebooks full of forgotten words, he now felt relaxed, almost peaceful. And here is something important to remember. When learning feels calm and enjoyable instead of stressful, real progress becomes much easier to reach, almost without you noticing the effort at all. One night, Jack listened to a simple story about a family sitting down together for dinner. The story used easy, everyday phrases. How was your day? I'm hungry. The food is delicious. Thank you. At first, these phrases seemed ordinary, almost too simple to matter much. But after hearing them many times, something interesting happened inside Jack's mind. These exact phrases began appearing naturally, on their own, whenever he spoke to himself in English during the day. He did not need to search for them or translate them first. They simply arrived, ready and waiting, the moment he needed them. This led Jack to an insight that changed the way he studied from that point forward. Many learners spend most of their energy chasing brand new words, always searching for something bigger, rarer, and more impressive. But Jack learned that familiar words are often far more valuable than new ones. A single word you know deeply, one you have heard 100 times in real situations, is worth so much more in real conversation than 10 new words you barely remember and have never truly practiced. Because of this, Jack stopped trying to memorize huge vocabulary lists filled with rare, complicated words. Instead, he focused on the common, everyday words and expressions, the ones that appear again and again in real English, the ones people actually use to live their normal daily lives. He listened to them repeatedly. He used them repeatedly. He reviewed them gently, again and again, until they became a true, natural part of his own daily language. Something else began to change too, something Jack did not expect at first. His pronunciation slowly started improving. Before this, he often read English words correctly on the page, but said them incorrectly out loud, the way many learners do because they know the spelling, but never truly learned the sound. Night listening solved this problem for him, almost by accident. Every single evening, his ears heard native speakers pronounce these words correctly, again and again, without him even trying to study pronunciation directly. Slowly, his ears became trained, sharper, and more sensitive to the real sound of English. And once the ear is trained well enough, the mouth naturally begins to follow behind it, copying those same sounds more and more closely over time. One day, out of curiosity, Jack recorded himself speaking English for 1 minute. Then he found an old recording from several months earlier and listened to that one too, right afterward. The difference honestly shocked him. His pronunciation had grown clearer. His speech sounded smoother, less broken. His voice carried more confidence than before. For the very first time in a long while, Jack felt genuinely proud of how far he had come. But this journey was not always easy, and Jack wants you to understand this part too. Some mornings, he woke up feeling tired, with no real motivation at all. Some days, he wondered if any of this was truly working, or if he was simply imagining small improvements that were not really there. During those difficult, uncertain moments, he reminded himself of something simple but important. Progress is not always visible while it is happening. Think about how a phone charges overnight. You plug it in before bed, and the screen shows a small number, maybe 20%. You do not sit and watch that number rise, minute by minute, hour by hour. You simply sleep. And when you wake up, without you seeing a single moment of the actual charging, the number reads 100%, full and ready for the day ahead. The charging never stopped, not for 1 second, even though you never once saw it happening. Language learning works in a very similar way. Growth is happening underneath the surface, steadily, even on the days you cannot see it or feel it at all. This simple belief helped Jack stay consistent, even through the harder days. He listened before bed. He slept well, protecting that rest carefully. He practiced gently during the daytime hours too. And slowly, month after month, English began weaving itself into every corner of his ordinary life. He listened while walking outside. He listened while relaxing at home. He listened before closing his eyes each night. English was no longer something separate from his life, sitting in a textbook somewhere. It was simply everywhere around him now, present in small, comfortable moments throughout each day. One evening, Jack realized he had listened to more than 100 different English stories since he began this routine. 100 stories, 100 separate chances to hear new vocabulary, natural pronunciation, and real sentence patterns, night after night. It was no wonder he was improving. Each night had added something small. Each story had taught him something new, even when he was not actively trying to learn it. And 100 small somethings, added together, had quietly become one large change. Then, one particular night, something happened that made Jack smile deeply the next morning. He had a dream, and inside that dream, people around him were speaking English. For the very first time in any dream he could remember, he understood them clearly. The dream itself was simple. People were talking together, they were asking each other questions, they were sharing small stories, and somehow, inside his own sleeping mind, Jack understood most of what they were saying. When he woke up, he laughed to himself. Maybe it was only a dream, nothing more than that. But it felt like a small sign. English was slowly becoming part of his mind, part of his everyday thoughts, part of his actual life, not just a subject he studied from the outside anymore. In that moment, Jack understood something important, something worth remembering clearly. Learning English in your sleep was never truly about magic. It was never about becoming fluent overnight, as if by some hidden trick. It was about something quieter and more honest than that. It was about giving your brain good, calm information before it rests each night. It was about helping your memory grow steadily stronger, one small night at a time. It was about building simple habits that work for you, day after day, without demanding too much effort all at once. And Jack was only just beginning to discover exactly how powerful those small nightly habits could truly become over time. But soon, Jack would learn something else too, something uncomfortable, but very important. He would discover the one common mistake that stops so many English learners from making real progress at night. A mistake hiding in plain sight, right before bedtime. And learning to finally avoid that one mistake would help him improve faster than almost anything else he had tried before. For several weeks, everything had been going beautifully for Jack. He followed his small routine every single night. He listened to simple stories before bed. He slept well, deeply, peacefully. He practiced a little during the day too, whenever he had a free moment. His progress felt steady, almost like walking up a gentle hill, one comfortable step after another. But then, quite suddenly, without any clear reason, his progress seemed to slow down. Some mornings, he understood less than he expected to. Some evenings, familiar words felt strangely distant again, like old friends who had suddenly become strangers. Jack felt confused. Why am I not improving as quickly as before? He asked himself, sitting alone with his notebook one evening. At first, he assumed the problem was simply his English itself. Maybe he needed harder lessons now. Maybe he needed more vocabulary, more grammar rules, more hours of study every single day. This is usually the first place learners look when progress slows down, toward more effort, more content, and more pressure. But after thinking carefully, without rushing to a quick answer, Jack discovered something surprising. The real problem was never his English at all. The real problem was hiding somewhere much closer, inside his own bedtime habits. Here is what Jack noticed once he finally paid close attention. Every single night, right before starting his English listening, he spent a long time scrolling through his phone first. He watched random videos, one after another. He read comments under posts he barely cared about. He jumped from one small distraction to the next, without ever really deciding to. Sometimes, he stayed awake much later than he had planned, simply because his thumb kept moving across the screen almost on its own. By the time he finally turned on his English story, his mind already felt busy, crowded, and restless, even though his body was lying still in bed. One evening, Jack decided to test something. He turned his phone completely off, 1 full hour before going to sleep. No social media, no endless scrolling, no small notifications pulling at his attention. Instead, he simply spent that same hour listening to calm English stories, the way he had originally planned to, months earlier. And the difference was almost immediate. His mind felt peaceful in a way it had not felt in weeks. His attention sharpened. He understood far more of what he heard that night than he had in days. To understand why this happened, think about a simple glass of water with a little mud stirred into it. If you keep stirring that glass again and again, with a spoon, with your finger, with anything at all, The water stays cloudy and unclear no matter how long you wait. You cannot see through it. You cannot see anything settle at the bottom. But the moment you stop stirring and simply let the glass sit still on the table, something begins to happen. Slowly, the mud sinks down toward the bottom. The water above it clears, bit by bit, until eventually you can see straight through it, clean and calm. Your mind works in almost exactly the same way at night. Scrolling your phone right before bed is like constantly stirring that glass of water, over and over, never letting anything settle. But sitting still, listening calmly to something simple, is like finally letting the water rest. Only then can everything you learned that day actually sink down and settle properly into memory. Jack realized clearly now that a calm mind learns far better than a busy, crowded one. This became one of the most important lessons of his entire journey, maybe even more important than any single vocabulary word or grammar rule he had ever studied. Learning English, he understood now, is not only about what you study, it is also about the environment you create around that studying, the conditions you allow your own mind to rest inside. A tired, distracted mind struggles to hold on to new information, no matter how good that information actually is. But a calm, focused mind, even for just 20 minutes, can absorb and keep far more than hours of stressed, scattered effort ever could. From that evening forward, Jack protected his bedtime routine carefully, almost the way you protect something fragile and valuable. Every night, he followed the same simple steps, in the same simple order. First, he finished whatever small tasks remained from his day. Then he got ready for bed, brushing his teeth and dimming the lights around him. Next, he turned off his phone completely and set it aside, out of reach, in another room if possible. Only then did he listen to English for 20 or 30 calm minutes. After that, he allowed himself to fall asleep. This routine was simple, almost embarrassingly simple when he described it to himself out loud. But it worked, consistently, night after night. Human beings, Jack noticed, genuinely love routines, more than they usually realize. When you repeat the exact same small habit at the exact same time every single day, it slowly stops requiring effort or motivation at all. You no longer need to convince yourself to do it. You simply do it automatically, the way you brush your teeth without ever really deciding to each night. Jack also noticed another benefit appearing alongside this new habit. His sleep itself became deeper and more restful. Before, his mind used to stay busy even in bed, thinking about many small things at once. Now, his mind felt calmer as he closed his eyes, settled by the simple story he had just listened to. And better sleep, it turned out, helped his English learning even more directly than he expected, feeding back into the very same cycle he had built. One morning, Jack woke up feeling genuinely refreshed, clear-headed, and light. While eating breakfast, almost without thinking about it, he played an English story on his phone. To his own surprise, he understood almost every single word. Sentences that once felt confusing now made complete, simple sense. Words that once felt heavy and foreign now felt light and familiar. He smiled to himself over his breakfast. These small victories, one after another, kept him excited to continue, even on days when progress felt slow. Something else began happening during this period too, something Jack found genuinely fascinating. He started noticing English appearing everywhere around him, almost as if the world itself had suddenly become louder in English. When he watched movies, he recognized small phrases he had already heard many times before in his bedtime stories. When he listened to songs on the radio, he understood more of the actual lyrics than before, not just the melody. When he read articles online, familiar vocabulary kept appearing again and again, words he now recognized instantly instead of stopping to translate. This was not because the world around him had changed in any way. It was because his own brain had changed. The more English he genuinely absorbed, the more English he began to notice. Almost like putting on a pair of glasses for the very first time and suddenly seeing small details that were always there, just previously invisible to him. As the weeks continued passing, Jack became more disciplined, though not in a harsh way. Some nights, he still felt tired. Some nights, a small voice inside him whispered, "Just skip it tonight, just this once." But he remembered something important he had learned through all of this. Success comes from consistency, not from perfection. You do not need to study for 5 exhausting hours every single day to truly improve. You simply need to keep showing up, night after night, even briefly. A little practice repeated daily is far more powerful, in the long run, than a large amount of practice done only once in a while, then abandoned. So Jack followed this principle carefully. Even on his busiest days, he listened for at least 10 minutes. Even on his most difficult, exhausted days, he listened for just a few minutes, sometimes barely enough to notice, but he never fully stopped, not once. That one small, stubborn habit kept him steadily moving forward, even through his hardest weeks. One rainy evening, Jack sat near his window, listening to a simple English story while soft rain tapped gently against the glass outside. The story itself was easy to follow now, effortless almost. As he listened, a small realization arrived in his mind. Just a few months earlier, this exact same story would have felt genuinely difficult to him, full of unclear words and confusing sentences. Now, it felt completely easy, almost too simple. This realization filled him with a warm, steady kind of confidence. For the first time in a while, he could finally see just how far he had actually traveled. Before turning off the light that rainy night, Jack opened his notebook one more time and wrote something simple inside it. He wrote, "Small steps every day create big results." Then he closed the notebook and smiled to himself in the dark. Those particular words slowly became his own personal motto from that night forward. Whenever he later felt discouraged, tired, or unsure of his own progress, he would read that same sentence again to himself. It reminded him to stay patient. It reminded him to trust the process he had built for himself. And most importantly, it reminded him that every single listening session mattered. Every calm evening mattered. Because each small effort, added together patiently over time, was steadily helping him become a stronger, more confident English speaker. And soon, Jack was about to discover another powerful secret hiding just ahead of him, one that would finally help him stop translating every single sentence inside his own head, and instead begin thinking directly in English itself. That particular discovery would change the entire shape of his learning journey in ways he could not yet fully imagine. For a long time, whenever someone spoke English to Jack, his brain followed the exact same slow, tiring pattern, every single time, without exception. First, he heard the English words. Then, inside his head, he translated those words into his own native language. Only after that second step could he finally understand the actual meaning. English first, translation second, understanding third. This process felt safe and familiar to him, the way an old habit always does. but it was also painfully slow, much slower than he ever admitted to himself out loud. Think about this process like a phone call with a translator sitting on the line between you and a friend. Your friend asks you a question in English, but you cannot understand it directly, so the translator repeats it to you in your own language. You think of your answer in your own language too, and then you tell it to the translator, who then repeats your answer back to your friend in English. By the time this entire slow chain finally finishes, your friend has usually already moved on and asked you something else completely. This is exactly what was happening inside Jack's own mind. Every single time someone spoke to him, there was an invisible translator sitting between his ears and his understanding. And that translator, however helpful it once seemed, was slowing down every single conversation he tried to have. By the time Jack finally understood one sentence completely, the other person had usually already said another one, sometimes two. Important pieces of information slipped straight past him while his brain was still busy translating the previous sentence. Conversations left him feeling confused, tired, and frustrated, even when he technically knew every single word being used. But then, one ordinary day, while listening to an English podcast during breakfast, Jack noticed something small but genuinely interesting. The speaker said, "Good morning," and Jack understood it immediately, instantly, with absolutely no translation happening at all. A few minutes later, the same speaker said, "How are you today?" And again, Jack understood it right away, with no delay whatsoever. This made him curious. Why could he understand certain phrases instantly, like lightning, while other sentences still needed that slow, tiring translator sitting between his ears? The answer, once he thought about it carefully, was actually quite simple. He had heard those exact phrases hundreds of times before, in real situations, in stories, in conversations, and in songs. Think about how your own fingers move across a keyboard once you have practiced typing for a long time. At the very beginning, you look carefully at every single letter, searching slowly for its exact position, one key at a time. But after enough practice, your fingers simply know where each letter lives, without you consciously thinking about it at all. You do not search for the letter's location in your mind anymore. Your fingers just move there directly, automatically. This is exactly what had happened inside Jack's brain, with phrases like, "Good morning," and "How are you today?" He had practiced hearing them so many times that his brain no longer needed a translator for them. Understanding simply arrived directly, the way trained fingers find their letters. That evening, Jack made an important decision. He would deliberately practice thinking directly in English, on purpose, every single day, instead of only waiting patiently for it to happen by accident. He knew this would not be easy. For many years, he had depended completely on that invisible translator sitting between his thoughts. Now he wanted to slowly remove it, piece by piece, the way you might carefully take down old scaffolding once a building can finally stand on its own. The very next morning, he tried a simple exercise for the first time. As soon as he woke up, he looked slowly around his own bedroom. Instead of naming things in his native language first, the way he always had before, he used simple English words directly. Bed, window, door, chair, book. These were small, ordinary words, nothing impressive or advanced at all, but they carried real power inside them, because for the very first time, Jack was connecting English words directly to real objects in front of his own eyes, with no translation standing in between at all. At first, this felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like walking with a slightly different rhythm than usual. His brain kept wanting to return to its old, comfortable habit of translating everything automatically. But Jack continued anyway, every single morning. Soon, he began building simple, full sentences too, not just single words. The window is open. My book is on the table. I am drinking water. The weather is nice today. These sentences were small and basic, almost childlike in their simplicity. But each one helped him practice thinking directly inside English itself, instead of borrowing his thoughts from another language first. After a few weeks of this daily practice, Jack started noticing real progress. His thoughts moved faster than before. His mind spent less and less time waiting on that slow internal translator. English began feeling more natural, more like his own, rather than something borrowed and awkward. One afternoon, Jack decided to go for a walk outside, and while walking, he tried something new. He described everything he saw around him, silently, directly in English. The sky is blue. The road is busy today. There are many people walking. A child is playing near the park. A car is passing by quickly. At first, his sentences were extremely basic, almost too simple to feel impressive. But that was completely fine, because the real goal here was never perfection. The real goal was simply practice, repeated again and again. Every single sentence he built this way helped strengthen a brand new mental habit, one small observation at a time. Soon afterward, Jack discovered another small but genuinely useful trick. Before falling asleep each night, he spent about 5 minutes thinking carefully about his entire day, but only in English. He asked himself simple questions. What did I do today? What did I learn today? What will I do tomorrow? Then he answered these questions himself, using simple English, right there in his own mind. Sometimes his answers came out short and basic. Sometimes he could not remember the exact right word he needed, and had to describe the idea a different way instead. But he kept going anyway, night after night. Slowly, his English thoughts grew longer and more detailed. His confidence grew right alongside them. Then, one particular evening, while listening to his usual English story before bed, something unusual and important happened. Instead of translating each sentence carefully, one by one, as he always had before, Jack suddenly started imagining the entire story directly, as pure pictures inside his mind. When the storyteller mentioned a house, Jack immediately pictured a house, clearly, in his imagination. When the storyteller mentioned a dog, he pictured a dog right away. When the storyteller mentioned a river, he pictured a river flowing gently, without a single word of translation appearing anywhere in his thoughts. There was no translator sitting on the line anymore. There was only direct, immediate understanding. This was a major breakthrough for Jack. In that exact moment, he finally understood something deeply important about language itself. Languages are not simply collections of separate words waiting to be matched up with other words in a dictionary. Languages are ideas, living pictures, and real feelings connected directly to real life. When you learn to think about those ideas directly, without forcing them through another language first, communication naturally becomes lighter, faster, and far less exhausting. From that day forward, Jack focused less and less on translation itself and more on pure meaning. Whenever he learned a brand new word, he tried to imagine it clearly, as a picture or a feeling, instead of simply writing down its definition. Whenever he learned a new phrase, he connected it immediately to a real situation from his own actual life. This small shift made his entire learning process far more effective than before, almost effortlessly. Something else changed too. His actual speaking speed began improving noticeably. Conversations that once felt stressful and slow, filled with long, awkward pauses while he silently translated in his head, now felt smoother and quicker. Words began arriving to him faster, more naturally, and without that long internal delay. He could finally respond in real time, participating in conversations the way a normal, confident speaker naturally does. Of course, he still made mistakes sometimes. Everyone does, no matter how advanced they eventually become. But mistakes no longer frightened him the way they once had. They simply became a normal, expected part of the entire learning process. One weekend, feeling unusually brave, Jack joined an online English conversation group for the very first time. Several learners from many different countries were there together, all speaking at once, quickly, naturally. At first, Jack felt genuinely nervous, his heart beating a little faster than usual. But he made a decision before speaking. During this entire conversation, he would try his hardest not to translate anything internally. Instead, he would focus completely on understanding ideas directly, the way he had been practicing alone, night after night. He listened carefully. He answered simply, using whatever English he already had ready inside him. To his own genuine surprise, the conversation went remarkably well. For the very first time, Jack felt truly connected to the discussion happening around him, present inside it, rather than trailing several steps behind everyone else. One evening, Jack found an old notebook from his very first months of learning English. He opened it and looked through the pages. Hundreds of words filled every line, each one written carefully, some with meanings beside them, some with example sentences underneath. But something surprised him as he read. He had forgotten most of these words completely. He had spent hours memorizing them, one by one, and yet so many had disappeared from his memory anyway. This made him stop and think. Maybe memorizing lists was never really the answer. Maybe there was a simpler, more natural way. That same night, Jack listened to a story about a young traveler exploring a new city. Inside the story, he heard the word journey several times. The next day, completely by chance, he heard that same word again, this time in a video. A few days later, he saw it once more, inside a short article he was reading. Soon, without ever opening a dictionary, without writing it down even once, Jack simply understood what journey meant. Nobody had forced him to memorize it. No test had asked him to prove it. The word had become familiar on its own, simply through repetition in real situations. Think about how you remember a person's face. The very first time you see a stranger, their face barely registers in your mind, easily forgotten by the next morning. But if you see that same person again at work, then later at the shop, and then again somewhere else, their face slowly becomes familiar, without you ever trying to memorize it on purpose. Words work in exactly this same way. A word you meet once, alone, on a list, stays a stranger. A word you meet again and again, inside stories, videos, and conversations, slowly becomes a face you recognize instantly, without effort. This experience taught Jack something important. Words are easier to remember when they live inside real situations, not when they sit isolated on a page. Your brain naturally prefers context. So from that point forward, Jack changed his approach completely. Instead of studying long, disconnected vocabulary lists, he simply focused on listening, and reading regularly, letting new words appear naturally, the way they actually do in real life. Whenever he met an unfamiliar word, he paid attention to how it was being used, what surrounded it, and what situation it belonged to, and then he simply moved on, trusting that useful words would return again soon enough on their own. One afternoon, while reading a simple story, Jack came across a word he did not know. Normally, he would have stopped immediately to check a dictionary. This time, he decided to keep reading instead. He looked closely at the sentence around the unfamiliar word, then the sentence after it, and slowly, he guessed its meaning from the situation itself. When he finally checked a dictionary afterward, his guess turned out to be correct. This is exactly what native speakers do naturally, all the time. They do not know every single word they hear, but they understand meaning through context, constantly, without even realizing they are doing it. Jack began practicing this same skill deliberately, every day, and the more he practiced it, the stronger and faster it became. Alongside this, Jack discovered one more small but powerful habit. Whenever he learned a new word, he tried to picture it clearly inside his mind, rather than simply reading its definition. If the word were mountain, he pictured a mountain. If the word were peaceful, he imagined a calm, quiet place. These small mental pictures helped new words stick far more firmly than any written definition ever could, because a picture, unlike a definition, connects directly to memory and feeling. Something else changed too. Jack stopped worrying about understanding every single word he encountered. Many learners believe they must understand everything perfectly, but this simply is not true, not even for advanced speakers. Even native speakers regularly hear unfamiliar words in daily life. The real goal was never perfection. The real goal was progress. So Jack trained himself to feel comfortable understanding around 80 or 90% of what he heard, and to simply continue forward from there. Think about watching a football match through a small gap in a fence. You cannot see the entire field. Sometimes a player runs out of view for a second, and you miss exactly what happened at that one moment. But you still understand the match perfectly well. You see the goal. You see the score change. You follow the story of the game from beginning to end, even though a few small moments slipped past the gap in the fence. This is exactly how understanding a language actually works, even for native speakers. You do not need to see every single moment clearly to understand the whole match. You only need enough of it, most of it, to follow along comfortably. Jack applied this same idea to listening and reading. If he understood 80 or 90% of a story, he simply kept going, trusting that the missing 10% would not stop him from understanding the whole thing. Jack also learned an important lesson about quality over quantity. Knowing 1,000 common, useful words deeply is often far more valuable than knowing 5,000 rare words vaguely. Common words appear everywhere, in conversations, books, videos, and everyday situations, again and again. Because of this, Jack focused his attention specifically on useful, frequent vocabulary, words he could actually hear and use immediately in his own daily life, rather than chasing impressive but rarely used words that looked good, written down, but rarely appeared in real conversation. One evening, while preparing for sleep, Jack opened his old notebook again and looked through its earlier pages. Many words that once felt confusing and heavy now felt light and easy, instantly understandable. Seeing this progress filled him with genuine happiness. He thought back to the very beginning of his journey, when English had felt completely overwhelming. and every single new word had felt like a difficult challenge to overcome. Now, every new word felt more like a small, welcome opportunity instead. Before closing his notebook that night, Jack wrote one final sentence inside it. Do not chase words. Let words become your friends. Then he closed the notebook gently, listened to his usual bedtime story, and let himself drift towards sleep, knowing that his vocabulary was growing steadily now, not through pressure or memorization, but through patience, repetition, and genuine familiarity. Soon, Jack would discover one more powerful lesson waiting just ahead of him, one that would finally help him speak English with real confidence, even in the exact moments he made mistakes. Jack was afraid of making mistakes. Every time he wanted to speak English, a small voice inside his head stopped him before he even began. What if I say something wrong? What if people laugh at me? What if my pronunciation sounds strange? What if I simply forget the word I need? These thoughts followed him constantly, and because of them, he often stayed silent, even when he actually knew the correct answer. One evening, while listening to his usual story before bed, Jack heard a simple sentence that stopped him completely. The person who never makes mistakes never learns anything new. He paused the story and sat with those words for a while, letting them settle. And slowly, he realized something important. Every single skill in life requires mistakes along the way. When children learn to walk, they fall down again and again. When people learn to ride a bicycle, they lose their balance many times before finally staying upright. When someone learns to play music, they play the wrong note more often than the right one, at least in the beginning. Why should learning English be any different at all? Think about a small child learning to speak their very first language. That child does not wait until every sentence is perfectly correct before finally opening their mouth. They simply speak, imperfectly, constantly, joyfully, making mistake after mistake without a single moment of shame. And because they keep speaking anyway, mistakes and all, they eventually become fluent, naturally, without ever once being afraid of getting something wrong along the way. The next day, Jack decided to change his own mindset, gently but deliberately. Instead of fearing mistakes, he would try to accept them instead as a normal part of the process. This was easier to decide than to actually do, because his fear had lived inside him for a very long time. A few days later, feeling a little brave, Jack joined an online English conversation group again. As the meeting began, his heart beat a little faster, and his hands felt slightly cold, the old familiar fear returning right on schedule. But this time, he remembered that one simple sentence from his bedtime story: the person who never makes mistakes never learns anything new. When his turn finally came to speak, he mispronounced another word without noticing at first. For a brief moment he felt embarrassed, his cheeks slightly warm. But then something unexpected happened. Nobody laughed at him. Nobody criticized him harshly. The other learners in the group were making mistakes too, openly, comfortably, without any shame at all. Everyone there was simply learning, together, at their own pace. By the end of that meeting, Jack felt genuinely relieved. His mistakes had not ruined anything at all. In fact, they had helped him learn something new. One person kindly corrected one of his sentences. Another taught him a useful new expression he had never heard before. A third person helped him properly pronounce a difficult word he had been saying wrong for months. Each small mistake had become a small, valuable lesson. This experience completely changed Jack's perspective. He slowly stopped seeing mistakes as enemies to avoid at all costs. He started seeing them instead as small teachers, each one showing him exactly where to improve next. From that day forward, he built a new habit for himself. Whenever he made a mistake, he wrote it down afterward, not to criticize himself harshly, but simply to remember and learn from it calmly. And because he spoke more often, he naturally improved faster too. Confidence created more practice. Practice created real improvement. Improvement then created even more confidence. It became a steady, positive cycle, each part feeding the next. One afternoon, Jack decided to challenge himself further. He recorded a short video of himself speaking English. At first, watching it back felt uncomfortable. He noticed every small pause, every mistake, every awkward moment in his own pronunciation. But instead of deleting the recording immediately, the way he wanted to, he watched it carefully all the way through. Then he recorded another one, and another after that. Each recording became a little smoother than the last. Over time, hearing his own voice stopped feeling strange or embarrassing. It simply became normal, useful information, showing him exactly where to focus his practice next. Several weeks later, Jack spoke with an English speaker online for almost 30 full minutes. Just months earlier, this would have felt completely impossible to him. Now, it felt exciting instead, almost enjoyable. Of course, he still made mistakes during that conversation. But he no longer stopped speaking because of them. When he forgot a word, he simply described it using other, simpler words instead. When he made an error, he corrected himself and kept the conversation moving forward naturally. Real communication was happening, and that, he finally understood, was the true goal all along. One night, while listening to his story before sleep, Jack heard another sentence that stayed with him deeply. Fluency is not speaking perfectly. Fluency is expressing your ideas with confidence. Jack smiled at those words. For a long time, he had believed that fluent speakers never made mistakes at all. Now he finally understood the real truth. Even fluent speakers make mistakes regularly. The real difference is simply that they keep talking anyway, without letting those small mistakes stop them completely. This single realization gave Jack a genuine sense of freedom. He stopped chasing perfection entirely. Instead, he focused on communication, on sharing his ideas clearly, on understanding others patiently, and on improving steadily, one honest conversation at a time. And as his confidence grew stronger, people around him slowly began noticing the difference too. His speaking became smoother. His voice became steadier. His hesitation became smaller, week after week. Jack was finally becoming the confident English speaker he had always dreamed of being, not because he had become perfect, but simply because he was willing to keep going, mistake after mistake, conversation after conversation. One night before sleeping, Jack opened his notebook and looked through all the mistakes he had written down over many months. Hundreds of small corrections filled those pages completely. Instead of feeling embarrassed by them, he felt proud instead. Every single mistake represented a real lesson learned. Then he wrote one final sentence inside his notebook that night, one that quickly became his favorite of all. Mistakes are proof that I am learning. He read it twice, slowly, letting the words settle inside him. Then he closed the notebook gently. As he listened to his bedtime story that night, Jack felt genuinely grateful. Soon, that same confidence would help Jack discover the very last piece of his journey, a lesson that would finally transform English from something he simply studied into something that felt like a natural, comfortable part of his everyday life. One ordinary morning, Jack woke up and listened to an English weather report. Not because it was a lesson, but simply because he wanted to know if it would rain that day. Another afternoon, he watched a cooking video in English, not to practice grammar, but because he genuinely wanted to learn a new recipe. One evening, he listened to a story before bed, not because he was forcing himself to study, but because he truly enjoyed the story itself. Slowly, without him even noticing the exact moment it happened, English had stopped being a subject he studied. It had become a normal, comfortable part of his everyday life. This was one of the biggest discoveries Jack ever made on his entire journey. Many learners spend all their time and energy studying English, but they rarely ever use English simply to live their life. Jack began doing both together, naturally, side by side. He continued learning, yes, but he also started living through the language itself. He read articles about topics he genuinely loved. He watched videos about his real interests. He listened to podcasts while walking outside. He followed English-speaking creators online, the same way he once followed people in his own native language. Think about learning to swim in a swimming pool carefully, following every rule, staying close to the edge, and never quite relaxing. Then one day, someone finally takes you to the open sea. At first it feels strange, even a little frightening, so much wider and less controlled than the small pool you knew. But slowly, you realize the water itself is the same water you always knew. You already know how to float. You already know how to move your arms. The sea was never truly different from the pool. It was simply bigger, freer, and far more alive. This is exactly what happened to Jack with English. He had practiced carefully inside his small, controlled routine for so long. Now, without fully realizing it, he was finally swimming freely in the real, open sea of the language itself, and it felt entirely natural. One afternoon, Jack was watching a travel video, simply enjoying it. Halfway through, he suddenly realized something remarkable. He had been listening for 20 full minutes without thinking about English even once. He was not translating. He was not analyzing grammar. He was simply enjoying the content itself, completely absorbed in it. Months earlier, this would have been impossible. Now, understanding simply happened on its own, in the background, the way breathing happens without anyone consciously thinking about it. As time passed, Jack grew more confident than he had ever been before. He asked questions when he was curious. Sometimes he still made mistakes, exactly as before, but they no longer bothered him the way they once had. His whole focus had shifted. His goal was never perfection anymore. His goal was simply connection, communication, and genuine understanding between him and other people. One evening, Jack met a new friend online, someone from a completely different country. They talked together about movies, about travel, and about ordinary daily life for almost an entire hour. Afterward, sitting by himself, Jack thought carefully about what had just happened. He had spoken English for a full hour, without fear, without constantly translating in his head, without ever wanting to give up halfway through. For a brief moment, he remembered the person he used to be, the one who was afraid to speak at all, the one who felt completely overwhelmed by English. That person suddenly felt very far away now, almost like remembering an old friend from long ago. The truth is, this journey had never been easy for Jack. There had been real challenges along the way. There had been difficult, discouraging days. There had been moments of genuine frustration when progress felt slow or even invisible. But Jack had never fully stopped moving forward, not once, not completely. One small step at a time. That had always been the real secret, hiding underneath everything else. Not talent, not luck, not any hidden trick. Simply steady consistency. Every night he listened. Every day he practiced a little. And all those small actions, added together patiently over many months, eventually became something powerful enough to change his entire life. One night, as Jack prepared for bed once again, he followed the same simple routine that had transformed his entire journey. He listened to a calm English story. He relaxed his body and mind completely, and then he smiled to himself in the dark. The story reminded him of his own beginning, all those months ago, a beginning that had started with one simple, almost silly question: what if I could learn English in my sleep? Now finally, Jack understood the real, honest answer to that question. Sleep alone could never make anyone truly fluent, not by itself. But sleep could genuinely support real learning. It could strengthen memory night after night. It could help the brain organize everything gathered during the day. Most importantly, sleep could become one small, powerful piece inside a much bigger, healthier learning routine. One built from patience, consistency, and gentle daily effort. Learning English in your sleep, Jack finally realized, was really about preparing your own brain for success. Listen before bed. Relax your mind. Get good sleep. Practice a little during the day. Then simply repeat, night after night. These simple habits, followed patiently over time, create truly powerful results. Before turning off his light that final night, Jack opened his notebook one more time and wrote one last message inside it. The same simple truth that mistakes had already taught him, now standing as the summary of his whole journey. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to keep going. Every fluent speaker in the entire world once started as a complete beginner, exactly like him. So if you are learning English right now, listening to this exact moment, remember Jack's story. Listen every day, even briefly. Be patient with yourself. Do not fear your own mistakes. Think directly in English whenever you can. Use English inside your real daily life, not only inside a notebook. Protect your sleep, and most importantly, never give up, because every word you learn is one real step forward, and every day you continue, however small, is a true victory. Thank you for joining this journey. Your own future fluency begins with the small steps you choose to take today.
Your progress doesn't end here. To continue advancing your English skills, click on the next video or explore the additional video that we thoughtfully selected for you.